My grandfather, Lorenzo Romano, was a detective in Los Angeles in the 1970s. When I was growing up, he would babysit me while my father worked. My mother had killed herself when I was a few months old, and my grandmother had died a few years before I was born. So it was just me, my father, and my grandfather. During those hours that I spent with him, my grandfather would tell me about the cases he worked, things that happened to him or his friends, and funny memories that he had from being on the force. Most of his stories were pretty standard. A few dumb kids were arrested for stupid things. He also worked undercover narcotics for a while. He worked a big drug case, and all in all, he got a lot of stories from all the years that he spent working for the LAPD. I was 15 when he first told me the story about the mother. My grandfather was 68 at the time, and it was a day where school had been canceled due to a snowstorm. My father still had to go to work, and so I had the entire morning with my grandfather. He made us coffee, black for him, cream for me. He also toasted up some blueberry bagels for us to eat for breakfast. After we ate, I took our dishes to the sink.
Hey Ed, have I ever told you about the mother?
I shook my head as I sat in my seat across the table from my grandfather. He crossed his arms and leaned them on the table, leaning in closer to me.
It was 1976 or so, mid-November, when we got the first call. It was a little girl. I still remember her. Her name was Andrea. She wasn't any older than 6 years old. She called because her mother hadn't come out of her room for the whole day, and nobody else was home.
I nodded and leaned in as well, immediately engrossed in my grandfather's tale.
Well, me and my partner, Andrew Winston, drive over there to check it out. So we get to the house. It's this really big house, too. Real nice. With a nice car parked outside in the driveway. Anyway, Winston and me, we get out and we knock on the door, letting the girl know that we're the police. A few minutes pass and the door opens up, and sure enough, there's a little girl there. She's wearing pajamas and her hair is all wild and messy, like when children first wake up, you know. She's got those big green eyes, and she looks weirdly calm about all of this. So, we ask her if we can go inside and check on her mum, and she lets us in. Now, I stay with the girl downstairs, because I know, worst case scenario, the mother is dead as a doornail upstairs, and no kid should have to see that. So I stay down there with the kid, who's just playing with these stuffed animals like nothing is wrong.
My grandfather stops at this point to take a drink of water.
So I'm sitting there with the kid, and a few minutes go by, and I haven't heard a word from Winston. So I decide I need to go up there and check out what's going on. So I tell the little girl to stay down there while I go upstairs to check on Winston.
So did Winston die? I asked. My grandfather shook his head.
No, he wasn't dead, but he sure looked like he was. He was standing there, facing the little girl's mum, who was dead. She had hanged herself and slit her wrists. On the wall behind her, it said, "Hello, Mother," in shaky letters, written in blood. But there was no way in hell that she had only been in there for one day. After I looked around the room, I walked over to Winston, who was white as a ghost. Standing there in the middle of the room, I shook him and slapped him a bit until he responded. And when he finally did, all he said was, "It was the mother," and started weeping like a baby, I had to drag him out of there.
What happened to the girl?
Well, she was fine. But when we asked her how long her mum had been in that room, she said it was only one day. We asked her why she hadn't called us earlier, and she said that her babysitter had been taking care of her. We tried asking the girl what her babysitter's name was, but she couldn't tell us, kept saying that she didn't know. We asked her what her babysitter looked like, but she said the same thing, that she didn't know.
So where did she go? What about her mom? How long had she been dead?
Patience, Eddy. All in good time. We found out later that her mum had actually been dead for over a week. But that little girl swore that it had only been a day since her mum had gone into that room. So we tried asking her about the mother. We wanted to know what that meant, if it was something that little girl shared with her mum, or if it was some sort of signature used by a serial killer.
So did the girl know who the mother was?
She said the mother was a friend, that her mum had told her that the mother helped people escape, but she wouldn't tell us who exactly this mother was or how she helped people. We found no evidence at the crime scene. No DNA, no fingerprints, no sign of a breaking and entering. Nothing. It was as if the mum had just killed herself without an explanation and left a weird message on the wall.
So how did she cut herself and have time to write the message and hang herself?
Ha! Exactly, Eddy. How did she manage all of that? There was no trail of blood from the wall to the body, only a pool of blood underneath it.
So what happened?
Well, we never found out, but a few months after that, Winston was admitted into a psychiatric hospital. His wife said he was going crazy. He wouldn't eat, wouldn't sleep, and he kept talking about his mother.
Maybe she meant the mother.
I think that's exactly what she meant. After Winston had been in the hospital for a few weeks, he died. He killed himself, slit his wrists, and drowned in a bathtub. The nurses insisted that they never left him alone in that tub. But that's how he died. And on the tub, written in blood, were the words, "Hello, Mother."
I shifted in my seat, starting to get a little bit scared, but not wanting my grandfather to stop mid-story.
Well, there was a whole investigation, but again, no evidence, DNA, fingerprints, or anything else. It seemed as if Winston really had killed himself, except the blood on the outside of the tub was still wet when the nurses discovered it. But by this time, Winston had been dead for a few hours. Again though, we found nothing, and it ended up just sitting there, along with the first death, unsolved.
So what did you do?
Well, Eddy, I decided that I was going to work this case and find out what was going on. I thought it might be a serial killer, and I wanted to catch them for killing my partner. So I worked the case for about a month before another death happened. This time, it was a teenager who was found dead in a butcher shop. He was young. I believe he was a high school kid, and he was hanging on a meat hook, suspended by his mouth. His wrists had been cut, and on the wall behind him was the same message. "Hello, Mother." Now my boss really wants someone to solve this case and catch the killer. So me and a few others began looking for clues again. One day in July, I got a call from a woman who was being attacked in her home. She wouldn't describe the attacker, just kept saying it was the mother. I drove over to the house as fast as I could, and when I got in, I saw it. I saw the mother.
Who was she?
Well, it wasn't a she, that's for sure. I'm still not sure what it was, but I saw it, standing there, killing the woman who had gone to help. I was frozen in place, unable to move, and this thing was disgusting. It was tall. It was all crouched down, but its back still touched the ceiling, and it had long, stringy hair that was grey and brittle. Its skin was light green, with brown patches that were oozing some sort of brown goo. It looked right at me. It had giant, black eyes, and that's when I noticed the woman's body hanging from the ceiling fan behind it. Then, it reached over with one of its long fingers and slit the woman's wrist. It waddled over to the wall and wrote, "Hello, Mother," with the woman's blood.
And did the mother do anything to you?
Well, I wouldn't be here if it had, Ed.
Oh, right.
But I don't remember seeing it leave. It just vanished. So I called it in, and they investigated the crime scene, and they said the woman had been dead for a few days now. But that was impossible. I had just seen her alive. Of course I wasn't going to say that. They would have sent me off, like they did to Winston. But that isn't even the strangest part.
What's the strangest part?
Well, the weirdest thing was the next day. Nobody remembered it. They didn't remember that woman. They didn't remember the mother. They didn't even remember Winston. He was gone. It was like he had been erased, even from the group photos from when we graduated together. No one knew who he was. The case files were all missing too. I was the only one remembered, and I still am.
After that one time, my grandfather never mentioned the mother again. The rest of his stories were more lighthearted. It was like he had completely forgotten about the mother, and I thought he had, until a few days ago. Last week, my grandfather died. They said it was suicide. My father called me, and I made the hour-long drive from campus to my grandfather's home. They told me that he had slit his wrists and hanged himself. My mind immediately thought of the mother and all of those similar deaths he had told me about years ago. 2 days ago, my father gave me a box that my grandfather had left for me. In it were journals, all filled with things that he remembered about the cases. Everything except the victims' names. There was also a note in an envelope addressed to me. There was a piece of paper in it with only one thing written on it. Remember the mother.